What's up guys, my name is Ace, and welcome back to another gun guide. This is the series where I cover all of the important stats, as well as best attachments and class setups for every one of the guns in Modern Warfare. In today's episode, we're going to be covering the most requested gun from the previous episode, and this is the MP5. So let's just hop right into it, and first off we'll have a look at the base damage profile, which, something that's interesting to point out with Modern Warfare, is for all of the SMGs, our base damage only applies to the limbs, so the arms and the legs. But our base damage profile is 30, 22, 17, which means it will be a 4 to 6 shot kill if you're shooting them in the limbs. However, with all of the SMGs in the game, we have a torso multiplier, which increases our damage to the torso, and this multiplier is 1.13. This means our torso damage profile is 34, 25, 19, which means it's now going to be a 3 to 6 shot kill. And this is generally what you're going to be seeing. Most shots tend to hit the torso rather than the limbs, so this is the damage profile that we're going to look at the most. However, we do also have a headshot multiplier, which is standard for Modern Warfare at 1.6, which means headshots are always going to be helping, with the exception of the base 3-shot kill range to the torso. You can never get a 2-shot kill with the MP5 on a full health enemy in core game modes. As for our rate of fire, this number might look familiar. The MP5 actually has an identical rate of fire to the M4A1 in this game at 833 rounds per minute. This means our statistical minimum time to kill, assuming torso shots, this is assuming you're not shooting them in the arms or the legs, is going to be 144 milliseconds in that 3-shot kill range, and it will drop off to a 360 millisecond time to kill within that 6-shot kill range. Keep in mind, the average time to kill in this game is about 200 milliseconds, so within that 3-shot kill range, the MP5 is absolutely dominant. Speaking of that range, let's bring up the range chart here, and as you can see, the 3-shot kill range extends out to 12.5 meters, which is not the greatest, but depending on how you're playing, you can generally keep yourself somewhat close to this 3-shot kill range with the MP5. As for suppressors, the lightweight suppressor will reduce all of your range values by 25%, so I generally don't recommend that attachment. And the monolithic suppressor actually increases all of our damage ranges by 7.5%, which is pretty much negligible with the MP5 since the base ranges are already so short, and since it's just a percentage increase, it's going to be a very small increase overall. Getting into hardcore game modes, the MP5 will be a 1-shot kill even to the limbs out to 12.5 meters, and then beyond that it will be a 2-shot kill out to infinity. For hipfire, as you can see here, the MP5 has very standard hipfire for the SMG category. The only SMG that beats it right now is the MP7, which is only slightly better. But just in general, the hipfire is very solid for this gun. As for our idle sway, or aiming stability, you can see here that it does move around a decent amount with the MP5. This is one of the downsides. If you're trying to hit that first shot accurately at longer ranges, you're going to struggle a little bit with the MP5. When it comes to recoil though, you can see here that it's got pretty moderate recoil. Now it does bounce side to side a little bit. It doesn't have that really easy to predict straight up recoil. It does kick upwards while bouncing side to side a decent amount. Also, after the first shot, you're going to get a pretty big jump to the second shot, and then from there the recoil is pretty moderate. So those are just a few things to consider with this, but in my personal experience, it's pretty easy to manage the recoil with the MP5. As for handling, our aim down sight time is very solid at 200 milliseconds, and our sprint out time is standard for the SMG category and quite fast actually at 133 milliseconds. That's with a normal sprint though. When we're using the super sprint or the tactical sprint, our sprint out time will slow down to 217 milliseconds, which really isn't that bad. It is standard for the SMG category. As for our magazine capacity, this is 30 rounds with 60 in reserve, which is pretty standard. And our reload add time is a little bit on the slow side actually at 1.7 seconds. It's not painfully slow, but it is noticeably slower than many of the others. Now if you want to speed that up, we can use the sleight of hand weapon perk, which will reduce our reload add time down to 1.15 seconds, which is much faster. This finally brings us into our mobility, and our movement speed is 98%, which is very solid. And our aim down sight strafe speed is 60%, which again is very solid. So that pretty much covers it for all of the base stats, assuming no attachments on the MP5. However, now we're going to move into the barrels, because barrels tend to have a decently large impact on the various guns in this game. First off, with the MP5, we have the FFS light barrel. This one states that it improves your aim down sight speed. However, in my tests, there is no measurable change with this particular barrel. I have no doubt that there is a very slight change going on behind the scenes. It's just not enough of a change that you notice any difference at 60 FPS. On top of that, this barrel does slow down your bullet velocity, which isn't great if you're trying to hit moving targets at longer ranges, and as a result, I would just say stay away from this barrel. It's not really doing any good for you. Next up, we have a very unique barrel for the MP5. This is a monolithic integral suppressor. So with this one, you get that sound suppression, you stay off the compass and the radar when firing your gun, and you get improved bullet velocity as well. But that does come at the cost of your aim down sight time, and you actually aim down sight 2 frames slower, which is absolutely noticeable. So with this one, I would say as long as you're combining it with an attachment that helps with your aim down sight time to offset that, it might be a great option for you. Moving on to the next barrel, this is the FFS mini barrel, and with this one, you aim down sight 1 frame faster, and your movement speed is increased all the way up to 100%. However, this does come at the downside of a reduction to your bullet velocity, so like I said earlier, that'll make it a bit more difficult to hit moving targets at longer ranges, and also you lose some of that recoil control, which means you're getting more vertical recoil with this attachment. And as you can see here, you can definitely notice a difference when it comes to recoil while using this barrel. So finally for barrels, we have the subsonic integral suppressor. So that's 2 different barrel options that give us a suppressor, which keep us off the radar and give us that sound suppression. But with this one, you also have no visible tracers, which you can see here. This is the difference. When you're not using this, you can definitely see that there are some tracers, whereas without it, there are no tracers at all. On top of that, your aim down sight speed is 1 frame faster, so it helps a little bit with that, and there's no enemy skulls when you kill them. So those little skulls that'll pop up above your teammate's body when they get killed, that won't be visible to the teammates of the player that you just killed. Now with this, you get all of those benefits, and the only thing you lose here is bullet velocity. So as long as you're not playing at really long ranges and you're keeping yourself close quarters, this is an excellent choice if you want a really nice, aggressive, stealthy class setup with the MP5. So that covers it for the barrel attachments on the MP5, but there's one more really important attachment to cover here, and this is the 10mm conversion. And I've been seeing this as a very popular choice to run, so let's see if it's actually worth using. So with this, we get a very slight change to our base damage. Up close, it's going to be exactly the same at 30 damage, mid-range is going to be 23 damage, and longer range is going to be 18. For both mid and long range, all they did was add 1 single damage point per bullet. However, when you apply that torso multiplier, which is the same with the 10mm rounds, we get a damage profile of 34, 26, 21. And this actually changes a couple things. First off, it's a little bit more forgiving at range if you're hitting limb shots. So if you accidentally hit 1 or 2 shots to the arms or legs mixed in with your torso shots, then it's okay with the 10mm rounds, whereas with the 9mm rounds, you've got to hit pretty much all of your shots to the torso at mid to long range if you want to get the optimal shots to kill. On top of that, in our furthest damage range, that base 18 damage range, now we've got the potential to have consistent 5-shot kills rather than the 6-shot kill potential that you have with the 9mm. Now on top of this, it does state that you get a range increase with the 10mm rounds, and let's just have a look at that. As you can see here, our 3-shot kill potential is unchanged with the 10mm rounds. However, our 4-shot kill range is improved by a noticeable margin, and like I said earlier, now we have that 5-shot kill potential out to infinity, whereas with the 9mm rounds, unless we're hitting headshots, you're not going to get a 5-shot kill. Now these benefits come at the downside of a very, very slight reduction to our rate of fire. Instead of 833 rounds per minute, it's now 822 rounds per minute, and this change is absolutely negligible. Our statistical minimum time to kill to the torso basically is 2 milliseconds longer than the statistical minimum time to kill with the 9mm rounds, and that 2 milliseconds is not perceivable by any means. And therefore, yeah, when it comes to rate of fire, don't even worry about it with the 10mm rounds, it's effectively the same rate of fire. As for another slight change that wasn't stated with the 10mm rounds, it very, very slightly slows down your reload add time from 1.70 seconds to 1.74 seconds. If you're really looking for it, you can notice it, but generally speaking, it's not that big of a difference. And finally, this brings us to the last downside of the 10mm rounds, and this is an increase to your recoil. And as you can see here, this recoil increase isn't major by any means. You've got a little bit of a higher total magnitude, but it bounces side to side about the same amount. It's pretty much just as easy to control and predict as well. You do have to watch out for that first shot recoil because you do get that pretty big jump after the first shot. But aside from that, it's really not too much different than the base 9mm rounds. As a result, would I recommend using 10mm rounds? I would say absolutely in many cases. There are very few noticeable downsides to using the 10mm rounds, although one big downside for me, and you'll see this reflected in at least one of the class setups I'll recommend for you, is you can only have a 30-round magazine. And I really like using extended mags on a lot of my guns, so in some cases, I would rather just use the standard 9mm MP5 with a 45-round magazine, rather than using the 10mm version and being stuck with 30 rounds in a mag. But with that covers it for all of the stats that I wanted to mention for the MP5, but now it's time to get into some great attachment combinations and class setups for this gun. And first up, we have a great all-around sort of a setup when it comes to the attachments for the MP5. With this one, we are using that 10mm conversion kit. And to make this thing a lot more accurate, we're using a compensator combined with the Commando foregrip. So this will help with not only the vertical recoil, but also that side-to-side bounce. Additionally, due to the fact that we're stuck with a 30-round mag and we have a relatively slow reload time, I did throw the sleight of hand weapon perk on this setup, and the 1 milliwatt laser, so it's a lot more competitive up close with hip firing. And that's it. That's a nice all-around sort of an MP5 setup that's good up close and really good at a distance as well. And when we pop that into an example class setup, we've got one here with the hardline perk as well as EOD and battle hardened. We've got a 1911 as our secondary, and we've got a C4 for our lethal and a stun for a tactical. With this type of setup, you can be hyper aggressive or you can hang back a little bit. The options are really open for you, so you can adapt to pretty much any situation with this particular setup. Next up, I wanted to do a setup that was designed a bit more for longer range play with the MP5. Of course, with it being an SMG, it's still going to be pretty good up close as well, but this one's really designed to push those limits at range with the MP5. This is something I wanted to feel comfortable taking into a ground war match and actually challenging people at ranges that you normally wouldn't want to with an SMG. So for this, we're using the monolithic integral suppressor, which helps with our bullet velocity at range. And we also do get the nice benefit of staying off the radar when firing, even though that's not the main purpose of this class. Next up, we're using the GI Mini Reflex. I really like the iron sights on the MP5, but when you are trying to push that range a little further out, it is nice to have some form of an optic on there, and I really like the GI Mini Reflex. For a stock, we're using the classic straight line stock, and this is to help keep the gun a lot more stable when aiming down sight, which will help with that first shot accuracy. Now, to compensate for that slower aim down sight speed while using that stock, we're using the stippled grip tape on the rear grip, so that'll help with aim down sight time as well as improve our sprint out time a little bit. And finally, once again, we are going to be using the 10mm conversion on this. Taking this into an example class, we've got that 1911 for our secondary, Scavenger for our tier 1 perk, because we're generally going to be hanging back and trying to go on longer streaks with this, which means we're also using the kill chain perk so we can chain those lethal streaks together. And also we're using Tracker, mainly just for a change of pace, but one thing I've found with Tracker that I really enjoy is you can see enemy death locations, which in ground war especially can help you pinpoint where enemies are going to be because people tend to travel in groups. For a lethal, I just threw a claymore on there. You could use whatever you want, but the reason I use a claymore combined with kill chain is oftentimes when I'm calling in like a cruise missile for instance, I want to make sure that I'm covered while I'm calling that in because I don't want to die because I'm trying to chain kills together with my kill streaks. So that definitely has saved me a few times while calling in a streak. So finally, we have one last setup, and this one is designed around stealth. With this, we're using that subsonic integral suppressor, which has a ton of benefits to it, but it does slow our bullet velocity down. So right there, you can see that this class setup is designed much more for close quarters engagements. And because of that, we're also using a 1 milliwatt laser to improve our hip fire up close. Additionally, we're using the Forged Tack Ultralight stock, which allows us to strafe faster while aiming down sight, and that can help us a little bit in gunfights. We've also got that stippled grip tape to help with our aim down sight and sprint out time so we can snap onto target more effectively. And finally, instead of 10mm rounds on this, we are going to be using the 45 round magazine. Since we're playing up close and personal with this class setup anyways, the 10mm rounds aren't really needed because I'm going to try to keep myself in the 3-shot kill range as much as possible with this setup. As for an example class here, the perk setup I've got here is EOD Ghost, of course, because this is a stealth class setup, and also tune-up so that we can get our Dead Silence field upgrade as often as possible, just to maximize that stealthiness. For our lethal, we've got a frag grenade. I love using that while getting on the enemy's flank. If you get a camper that's holed up in a room and they've got a claymore and they're just pre-aiming a doorway, you can often just bounce that frag grenade in and get an easy kill on them. And with that, that's going to wrap it up for today's gun guide on the MP5 in Modern Warfare. Of course, I'd like to know in the comment section below, what do you guys think about the MP5 in its current state? Do you think it's a really powerful gun, kind of a weak gun, somewhere in between? Just let me know those thoughts down below, and also I'd like to hear from you guys, which gun would you like to see me cover next? Keeping in mind, I have already covered the M4A1, I will leave a link to the gun guide playlist down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.